Ethan Cole sat in his car outside the glowing facade of Harvest Table, one of his most successful restaurants, and watched the evening crowd drift in. Couples laughed under the warm lights, the sound of clinking cutlery and soft jazz spilling out every time the door opened. He should have felt proud. This was his vision brought to life, replicated across the country. But instead, he felt detached. Somewhere along the way, his dream had turned into a balance sheet. For years, he'd built his empire from the top floors of glass towers, meeting investors, signing off on expansions, and approving budgets. People called him a visionary. Yet, the last time he'd spoken to a line cook or wiped down a counter had been years ago. Lately, the reviews coming in weren't just about the food, they were about the people. Complaints about rude managers, exhausted staff, and cold service had started to pile up. Ethan had brushed them off at first, assuming they were outliers. But a quiet unease had settled in. Something was wrong. So, tonight, he'd decided to find out for himself. No board members, no press, no one knew. He wore dark jeans, a faded hoodie, and a baseball cap, clothes that didn't belong to a man who sat on magazine covers. He looked more like someone coming in for a late dinner after a long shift, not the owner of the place. When he pushed through the restaurant door, a wave of warmth hit him, the mingling scents of butter, garlic, and baked bread. The lighting was soft, golden, the kind designed to make everything look comforting and alive. He slipped into a booth near the back, the kind with a view of both the dining area and the kitchen doors swinging open and shut. A waitress approached him, her smile polite but tired. Her name tag read, Lila. Her ponytail was slightly frayed, her apron dotted with faint stains that refused to wash out. "Good evening," she said, voice cheerful but thin. "Just one tonight?" "Yes, just me," Ethan replied, lowering his voice so his usual confident tone wouldn't give him away. She handed him a menu, the same one he'd personally approved months ago but hadn't actually read since. The prices seemed higher than he remembered. He glanced up and caught her rubbing her wrist, subtle but constant. "You okay?" he asked without thinking. She blinked, surprised by his concern. "Oh, yeah, just busy tonight," she said quickly and turned away before he could say anything more. Ethan watched her weave through the tables, balancing plates with quiet precision. The restaurant hummed with the rhythm of organized chaos, glasses clinking, orders shouted from the kitchen, laughter from a corner booth. Yet beneath it all, something felt strained. The staff moved fast, but their faces lacked warmth. It wasn't the same energy he'd once felt in his first little bistro 15 years ago, the place where everyone, from dishwasher to chef, felt like family. He remembered those early days vividly. He and his small team had cooked until 2 a.m., laughed until dawn, and shared leftover pasta straight from the pan. Every plate carried pride, every customer was a story. But here, watching his empire at work, he saw only repetition. Mechanical smiles, rushed service, and exhaustion. Lila came back with his drink, a glass of water with a lemon slice that looked hastily cut. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again, softer this time. She gave him a brief, almost apologetic smile. "Just one of those nights," she murmured and hurried away when another table waved for her. Ethan sipped his water and kept observing. A manager stood near the kitchen doors, arms crossed, barking quiet orders. A busboy, no older than 19, accidentally dropped a fork and was met with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. The door to the kitchen swung open again, and for a brief moment, Ethan caught a glimpse inside, steam rising, pans sizzling, the blur of white aprons and stainless steel. It was a scene he knew intimately, one that had once made his heart race with excitement. Now, it just looked tense. Then, he heard it, a faint sound beneath the din of the restaurant. A soft, broken sound. Crying. At first, he thought he imagined it. But when the door opened again, the sound became clearer, a muffled sob, quickly stifled. It came from behind the line, just beyond the swinging door. Ethan's stomach tightened. He looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they all did notice and just chose to ignore it. He stood slowly, pretending to stretch, then began walking toward the kitchen. The manager glanced up, frowning slightly, but Ethan gave a nod as if he were heading to the restroom. As he got closer, The sound grew sharper, a quiet, shuddering voice trying to hold back tears. He paused at the door, hand hovering over the handle. He shouldn't get involved, he told himself. He was undercover. He was supposed to observe, not interfere. But the thought of someone crying in his kitchen, his creation, made his chest ache. Without thinking further, he pushed the door open. Steam billowed out, carrying the smell of roasted herbs and hot oil. The noise of sizzling pans filled the air, and there, near the prep station, half hidden behind a shelf of plates, was Lila, the waitress who'd served him, her face buried in her hands. Ethan froze. In that moment, the successful CEO disappeared. All that remained was a man who suddenly realized he'd lost touch with the very soul of what he'd built. Ethan stood for a moment, unsure what to say. The kitchen buzzed around him. Chefs shouting orders, flames flaring up from the grill, the metallic clatter of pans echoing through the space. No one seemed to notice that one of their own was quietly falling apart in the corner. Lila's shoulders trembled as she tried to stifle her sobs, her hands shaking as she reached for a towel to wipe her face. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so as not to startle her. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" She spun around, eyes wide. For a second, she looked like a child caught doing something wrong. I'm fine," she stammered, forcing a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, but the trembling of her fingers betrayed her. "You don't look fine," Ethan said, keeping his tone soft, careful. He wasn't sure what role to play, customer, stranger, or something in between. All he knew was that something inside him refused to just walk away. She exhaled shakily and sank down onto a stool near the prep table, clutching the towel in both hands. "It's just been a long night," she murmured. Ethan crouched down slightly so they were at eye level. "Long night," he repeated. "Or long month." That made her look up. Her lip trembled, and for a moment, she tried to hold back another wave of tears. But then, the dam broke. "It's everything," she whispered. "I can't catch up anymore. Rent, bills, my mom's hospital stuff, and they cut my hours last week." She wiped her cheeks with her sleeve, embarrassed. "I shouldn't be telling you this. I don't even know you." "It's okay," Ethan said quietly. "Sometimes it's easier to tell a stranger." She gave a small, sad laugh. "Yeah, maybe." Her eyes darted toward the kitchen entrance. "Please don't say anything to the manager. He already thinks I'm too emotional." "Your manager?" Ethan asked carefully. "What happened?" Lila hesitated. "My paycheck was short again this week. Third time this month. When I asked about it, he said I must have clocked out wrong and that I should pay more attention. But I didn't. I double-checked." Her voice cracked with frustration. I can't lose that money. It's groceries, it's gas, it's everything." Ethan's jaw clenched. He felt the familiar rush of anger, the kind that used to drive him when he was younger, when injustice still felt personal. And he didn't fix it. "No," she said softly. "He told me if I keep complaining, I can find another job. But jobs like this are hard to get right now. I already tried applying to another restaurant, but they said they weren't hiring." She gave a humorless smile. "Guess I'm lucky to have what I've got." Ethan looked around the kitchen, really looking this time. The staff moved like clockwork, but their faces were hollow, drained. The head chef's voice carried authority, but not warmth. The manager stood at the far end, watching everything with a calculating eye, the kind of man who led by fear, not respect. Ethan recognized the type, efficient but heartless. The kind of person corporate loved because they kept numbers in line, even if they broke people in the process. He turned back to Lila. "How long have you been working here?" "Almost 2 years, she said. "It was great at first. We used to have a team that actually cared about each other. But ever since the last district manager left, everything changed. They cut corners, stopped approving overtime, and started pushing us harder. The new guy, Mark, he says we're replaceable." Her voice faltered. "Sometimes, I think he's right." "Hey," Ethan said firmly. "You're not replaceable." She blinked, surprised at the conviction in his voice. "You sound sure that." "I am," he replied. "I've been in kitchens like this before. I've seen what happens when the wrong people get power." "Are you in the business?" she asked, curiosity flickering through her exhaustion. Something like that, he said, offering a small smile. Used to be. A long time ago. She nodded, taking a shaky breath. Well, if you were, you probably know how it is. People think restaurant work is easy, but it eats you alive. You miss holidays, your feet ache all the time, and no matter how hard you try, someone's always yelling. Ethan felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost startled him. Every policy, every managerial system, every quarterly goal, those had come from him. And here was the result. A young woman on the verge of breaking down, believing she was disposable. Lila, he said after a moment, has anyone from corporate been here recently? Anyone from HR? She shook her head. Not that I know of. The last visit was maybe 6 months ago. They just came to check that the decor matched the new branding. Nobody really talks to us about anything else. Ethan swallowed hard. That was supposed to have changed. He'd built this company to care, to give people chances, not grind them down. Somewhere along the line, that mission had been lost, buried under layers of profit margins and performance metrics. He wanted to tell her who he was. He wanted to promise that everything would change tomorrow. But instead, he said quietly, "You don't deserve to be treated like this. None of you do." She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for an answer she didn't even know she was asking for. Then she smiled weakly. "Thanks. It's nice to hear someone say that." The kitchen door swung open suddenly, and the manager, Mark, appeared. His gaze swept the room, narrowing when he saw them. "Lila," he barked. "Break's over. Let's move." She jumped up, wiping her face quickly, muttering an apology. Ethan straightened, keeping his expression neutral. Mark gave him a curt nod before turning back into the kitchen, already shouting another order. Lila glanced at Ethan one last time, her eyes red but grateful. "Thanks for listening," she whispered before hurrying away. Ethan watched her go, the weight of the moment pressing hard against his chest. He'd come here undercover to observe. But now, it wasn't about observation anymore. It was personal. Something inside him had shifted, and by the time the night was over, he knew there would be no going back. The following morning, the city was still waking up when Ethan arrived at the regional office. He hadn't slept much. The image of Lila crying in that kitchen had burned itself into his mind. He'd spent half the night thinking about what had gone wrong, how a company he'd built on heart and purpose had turned into a place where fear ruled the floor. By dawn, he'd already called his assistant and arranged a meeting. No one except her knew he was coming. As he stepped through the sleek glass doors of his own headquarters, he couldn't help noticing the contrast. The floors gleamed, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polish, and the employees moved briskly, all smiles and polite greetings. It was the complete opposite of what he'd seen the night before. Different worlds, he thought grimly. The regional manager, a man named Carl Denton, arrived 10 minutes later. He was neatly dressed, confident, and clearly unprepared for what was about to happen. "Mr. Cole," he said with a broad smile, extending his hand. "What an unexpected surprise. We weren't informed of your visit." "That's the point," Ethan replied evenly. "Please, have a seat." Carl hesitated, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he complied. He sat across from Ethan at the long oak conference table, trying to read the CEO's expression. "I visited one of our restaurants last night," Ethan began, folding his hands on the table. "Harvest Table, downtown." Carl nodded, cautious now. "Ah, yes, one of our busiest locations. Excellent performance metrics this quarter." "Performance metrics," Ethan repeated slowly. "Is that what you'd call a kitchen where employees are afraid to speak up? Where paychecks are short and no one fixes it? Where managers threaten their staff?" Carl's eyes widened slightly, then he composed himself. "Sir, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Our staff turnover is within normal range, and any payroll errors." "Don't," Ethan interrupted sharply. The single word froze the room. "I spoke to one of your employees last night. A waitress named Lila." Carl's throat bobbed. "Sir, if she complained, I assure you." "She didn't complain," Ethan said. "She cried in the kitchen because she couldn't afford rent after missing wages for 3 weeks. And do you know what her manager told her?" He leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "To stop complaining or find another job." For the first time, Carl looked uneasy. "That's Unfortunate to hear, Mr. Cole. I'll have HR look into it immediately. Ethan stood up, pushing his chair back. You'll do more than that. He walked to the window, staring out at the city below. When I started this company, I promised it would be different. I'd worked in places where people were treated like machines. I built Harvest Table to be about people, community, and pride in honest work. He turned, his gaze sharp. Somewhere along the way, people like you forgot that. Carl swallowed hard. Sir, if there's been negligence at the store level, I take full responsibility. Good, Ethan said curtly. Because you're going to fix it. Today. But before that, where's the manager at that location? Mark, right, yes, sir. Mark Rivers. Have him come in, Ethan ordered. And bring Lila too. Within an hour, both arrived, Mark looking stiff and defensive, Lila looking pale and nervous. She hadn't been told why she was there. When she stepped into the room and saw Ethan sitting at the head of the table in a suit, her mouth fell open slightly. You, she whispered, you were the customer. Ethan gave a small nod. Yes, I was. Mark frowned, confused. Wait, you two know each other? Ethan turned to him slowly. I know enough. You're Mark Rivers, correct? Manager of the downtown Harvest Table. Yes, sir, Mark said quickly, trying to recover. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Cole. I didn't know you'd be visiting. I didn't announce it, Ethan said. I wanted to see how things really worked when no one was pretending. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Of course. Well, we've been running things smoothly. Smoothly. Ethan's tone cut through the air. You've been shorting paychecks, threatening staff, and creating an environment where people are terrified to speak. That's not smooth. That's failure. Mark's face flushed red. Sir, with respect, sometimes employees exaggerate. Ethan slammed his hand lightly on the table, not in rage, but with enough force to silence him. She didn't exaggerate. I saw it. I heard it. You've forgotten what leadership means. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Lila stood frozen, eyes darting between them, unsure whether to speak. Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. Lila, he said gently, you shouldn't have had to go through that. And you won't again. He glanced at Carl. Effective immediately, Mark Rivers is relieved of his duties. We'll find someone who actually understands respect. Mark started to protest, but one look from Ethan shut him down. He slumped back, muttering under his breath. Ethan turned back to Lila. As for you, you've shown strength and integrity even when things were unfair. I want you to stay. I'd like to promote you to assistant supervisor. You'll have the authority to oversee fair scheduling and ensure every employee gets what they're owed. Do you think you can do that? Lila's eyes widened in disbelief. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Ethan said, smiling faintly. She nodded, tears welling again, this time not from pain, but from relief. Yes, thank you, sir. When the meeting ended, Mark left in silence, Carl following behind to make arrangements. Lila lingered by the door, still looking stunned. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Ethan shook his head. No, I did, because somewhere along the way, I forgot what mattered most. You reminded me. She smiled through her tears. You really care, don't you? I used to, he said quietly. Now I will again. As she left, Ethan turned back to the window. Down below, the city moved on, people hurrying to work, cafes opening, lives intersecting. For the first time in a long while, he felt connected to it all. The empire he'd built wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was people like her. And he was going to make sure they were never invisible again.